Hi, I'm Joyce Slocum. I'm President and CEO of Texas Public Radio. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. It is wonderful to be able to share this fantastic program with so many people. And so that everyone can enjoy the program, please take a quick minute, make sure your devices are silenced. Thank you for that. So we have you're all special guests, but there are some folks that I'd particularly like to recognize tonight. We have some art students who have joined us this evening. Blue Star's Mosaic Art Program is here with Alex Rubio and several young artists. And we have several young artists joining us from Burbank High School, which is Vincent's alma mater. So welcome. We also want to say a welcome to Councilman Ray Saldana. I understand he's with us tonight. Councilman, you want to give us, hello. Thanks for coming. And I just saw the chairman of the board of TPR come in, James Lifshitz. Hey, James, thanks. So we are super proud to co-host tonight's event with the McNay Art Museum. The idea to have an event with Susan Stamberg and Vincent Valdez was inspired by Rich Asti, the director of the McNay, who chose Vincent's The Strangest Fruit No. 9 as his first acquisition. We're so lucky to have Rich here at the McNay. He is the first Hispanic director of the McNay. And he's been here just about a year and a half. I already count him as a close friend, so that's great. And he's going to share more about his acquisition in a minute. And tonight we are honored to have two extraordinary people who are going to join in conversation, and they'll be taking the stage shortly, but let me tell you a little bit about them. The subject is San Antonio's own Vincent Valdez, his evolution as an artist, and the powerful issues that he confronts in his work. To facilitate and direct the conversation, we are privileged to have one of the nation's foremost journalists and interviewers, Susan Stamberg. Now a special correspondent, Susan has been on staff with NPR since the network began in 1971, and she is one of the founding mothers of National Public Radio. She was the first woman. Susan was the first woman to anchor a national nightly news program. She's won every major award in broadcasting and is in the Broadcasting Hall of Fame and the Radio Hall of Fame. One of the most popular broadcasters in public radio, Susan's well known for her conversational style, intelligence, and knack for finding an interesting story. In her years as co-host of All Things Considered and host of Morning Edition and Weekend Edition, she's interviewed thousands of people. She earned a bachelor's degree from Barnard College and has been awarded numerous honorary degrees, including a Doctor of Humane Letters from Dartmouth College. She's a fellow of Silliman College, Yale University, and has served on the boards of the Penn-Faulkner Fiction Award Foundation and the National Arts Journalism Program based at Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. She's a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And I'll give you a little bit of insider information here. When I was at NPR and we were building the new headquarters building, we prevailed upon Susan, and her voice is now the voice of the NPR elevators. Going up.
That's my legacy.
Susan has also written 2 books, including Talk, NPR's Susan Stamberg Considers All Things. Tonight, we asked Susan to consider one of her favorite subjects, art, and specifically, the art of Vincent Valdez. Vincent Valdez was born in San Antonio and currently lives and works in Houston. He earned a BFA from the Rhode Island School of Design. He's the recipient of the Joan Mitchell Foundation grant for painters and sculptors, as well as residencies at the Skowhegan School of Painting, the Vermont Studio Center, and the Künstlerhaus Bethania Berlin residency. Vincent's work is included in museum collections and has been exhibited nationally and internationally, including at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, Snipe Museum of Art at the University of Notre Dame, Parsons School of Design in Paris, and Fundación OSDE Buenos Aires, among others. Next month, on July 17th, The Blanton Museum of Art in Austin will open an exhibition, Vincent Valdez, The City. His work will also be featured in the exhibition, Suffering from Realness at Mass MoCA in spring 2019. Tonight's conversation, though, starts with the McNay and director Rich Asty's selection of Vincent Valdez's The Strangest Fruit, No. 9, as his very first acquisition for the museum. It's my pleasure to introduce tonight's co-host, Rich Asty.
Yes, Mocha, have you been there?
It's amazing.
Thank you, Joyce. Welcome, everyone. Joyce, if you didn't know her before tonight, is a very tough act to follow. I was telling her earlier that I was at the Tobin Center recently when Joyce welcomed David Sedaris to San Antonio. If you were there for that wonderful performance. And the whole time I kept thinking, poor David Sedaris. He has to follow Joyce. So now I'm thinking, poor me. But I wanted to welcome everyone. If you didn't know it before you came onto our grounds tonight, you just entered the first modern art museum in the whole state of Texas. And as Joyce said, I'm the director. I'm the third director. I happen to have the great pleasure tonight of being joined by the second director, Bill Kiego, who's with us here this evening. Now, I'm the third director. I'm also the first Hispanic director, as Joyce mentioned. Así que les quería dar a todos la gran bienvenida al primer Museo de Arte Moderno en todo el estado de Texas. Translation for those who couldn't follow, me McNay as Sue McNay. So I know Spanish is always 25% longer than English. Tonight, we welcome two thought leaders to the stage here at the museum in Considering Art, as you see on the screen, Considering Art, a conversation between Susan Stamberg and Vincent Valdez. We're in the business of celebrating thought leaders here on our 23-acre campus. In fact, very recently, we welcomed to the stage one of my great inspirations, Holland Cotter from the New York Times, the Pulitzer Prize-winning art critic of the Times. And we also welcomed last year Nicole Ivey, the American Alliance of Museums Director of Inclusion, to come here and inspire us on how to navigate our world in the 21st century, our increasingly complicated world every day in now 2018, and what vital role can places like this, can places like TPR actually play to our community. And so Susan Stamberg, it's an honor to have you join that illustrious group. Thank you for coming here tonight and taking our reputation for brilliance to new heights. So thank you, Susan. And Vincent, welcome home. So as you heard from Joyce, Vincent has left us. He decamped for Houston. I'm still in denial, because when we met, there was an unwritten promise that we would stay in San Antonio for some time. But he is home in many ways right here on our 23 acres, because prior to my coming here, under Bill Kiego's leadership, we organized two major exhibitions that featured the great work of Vincent Valdez right here at the McNay. And by the time I joined in September of 2016, I brought with me a focus on social justice, on moral leadership, and the vital roles that museums can play as moral compasses in our communities. And within minutes of sharing these ideas, these core values that I brought with me, many people, including Joyce, said, you gotta meet Vincent Valdez because he's painting everything you're saying. And among the proudest moments I've ever had being here was within 3 months, as Joyce mentioned, watching the very first acquisition of a painting by Vincent Valdez into the permanent collection. And that happened, yes. And you're going to hear more about The Strangest Fruit, number 9, but we also even created a video of that very transformative acquisition that is still available online. And one of the greatest moments since then is what Vincent's acquisition has done for the McNay. It's actually paved the way for a greater emphasis on more works in the collection by artists of color and women artists. And we continue with that commitment every year, including last year when we added 3 iconic works by African-American artists from 3 different generations to the permanent collection. They await you as you leave this room in the next gallery after the presentation tonight. And also, just yesterday, if you saw artdaily.org today, we added a brand new work to the permanent collection by an iconic woman artist from the 20th century. If you know Alice Neal, we now have a major portrait by Alice Neal of a young Hispanic girl in Spanish Harlem in Upper Manhattan that awaits you on your next visit, painted during World War II. So we take great pride in being a vital community center right here at the McNay, a place where strangers can meet and safely engage in the best of modern and contemporary art. And when they do that, we know one thing: when they leave our campus, they leave changed and they leave transformed. Well, tonight you too will leave changed and transformed thanks to two very special people. So please join me in welcoming them to the stage, Susan Stamberg and Vincent Valdez.
Thank you, Rich.
Hi. Or hello, San Antonio. That's the way to do it. Or hola, yes? San Antonio. That's the extent of my Spanish. And hi to you.
Hello, Susan. Welcome.
Thank you
Welcome.
so much. And to you, I love that notion that he's welcoming you home in so many ways.
Sure. Yeah, I
And
mean,
you grew up here.
I grew up here, born and raised. It's always amazing seeing so many familiar faces, my family, my friends. I mean, this is the community that I was raised in. And, you know, it's always a special treat to return.
Yeah. Well, we're going to see you, little Vincent, as you started out. He's got this magic instrument, a clicker.
Can work
and
wonders.
it shows visual things. I have to do it on the radio just through words. But he's got a clicker that allows you actually to look at things.
So maybe I'll set up a little bit on.
Yeah.
This is actually, you know, Susan and I decided to start here. We thought it'd be a special treat for you guys. I gotta say, before we view this, this is a really special gift. I have been searching for this thing for almost 25 years, and I finally found it yesterday. And it really captures a moment that back then I didn't realize how drastically my life was about to change. You know, it changed, this experience changed the entire course of my future. So I was in the 5th grade here, and I had participated in an open call for a mural project that was about to occur at the old Esperanza Peace and Justice Center, which was on the North Florida's across M.K. Davis, I think. And so for those of you that recognize and know Alex Rubio, this is the first time that I had ever encountered Alex. Now, Alex Rubio was the project coordinator. We're the two guys in the plaid shirts. Alex was still wearing sunglasses on a cold winter day in December. But this was the all-black phase. This was the all-denim phase in plaid. And so at this moment, this was my first introduction to Alex, and Alex became my mentor for the next 8 years, from the age of 10 all the way through my teen years. After this mural project, Alex hired me on various projects, independent projects that he had around the city of San Antonio, painting murals, and I became his apprentice. But this really was my first real education.
And you're 10 years old here?
I'm 10 years old.
But can you get that, where's that still shot that you have?
The still, I don't think we have on here, but it was
okay.
similar to this. So this poor kid was doomed. He had no idea. So here I am painting for the first time. You know, I'd never picked up a paintbrush, and I somehow came up with this scene of these field workers that were cropping the fields, and I finished it off by adding silhouettes of these combat jets that were about to drop napalm over the field, and it had a slogan written that said, "Make food, not war." And you know, they were very dark times in the 80s. And I swear, I think I have that same exact outfit today. I just wish that I still had that hairline.
Yeah. What happened to this mural? Is
So
it
this
still-
mural was the last mural, it was my first mural, and it was the last mural that I had outdoors that was still standing, and it just got covered up about 3 years ago.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So I have one mural that's left in the entire city, and that's at my alma mater, Burbank High School. It's indoors inside the cafeteria. I spent about 2 years painting this sort of, it was sort of like my version of a Sistine Chapel. It was the history of American rock and roll.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
And that's still up?
Oh, it's still up.
It
and-
better be.
You know, I mean, I rarely go back there to visit. I mean, it's, you know, it's always a strange thing to revisit old
Yeah.
friends and
Yeah.
old work. You know, I tend to walk by old work like this because
But talk about you coming. You said this is the first time you ever painted?
it was the first time
Ever
I painted.
held a brush?
You know, I started drawing at an extremely early age. I mean, for me, it was as normal as, or as natural as learning to talk or walk. And so my parents tell me that by age 4, I was obsessed. And I'm not sure, you know, again, it just was something that just felt like an instinct, right? And so it was my first language, were pictures, making pictures. I didn't realize that, I thought because it was so natural for me, I assumed it was that natural for everyone else. It wasn't until about maybe the first grade that I started noticing that there was some difference. I mean, you could see the difference between some of the happy faces and hearts, and then I was trying to do these more sophisticated, like complex images. But it wasn't until, I didn't wise up until about the 3rd grade, and then I really figured out that not only was there something different that I could do, but I could sell these things.
You
And
could sell them.
I was selling drawings for like $0.25, and then by 5th grade I was at $1, right? And so it just sort of like, but it was all because I was such a very shy, quiet person. It was my way of connecting to people, and that's something that I learned and I was very aware of very, very quickly, and I think that's something that I still embrace to this day. I use images the power of images to connect to people.
Well, it sounds as if it was your first language.
Sure.
And you discovered your way to communicate in
Definitely,
it.
yeah.
But how did you become, because you'll see when we get to the paintings, such an extraordinary draftsman. I mean, your technique is exquisite. It's so fine and precise. When did that happen?
I mean, it's been a lifetime of crafting and refining, a mastery of, you know, it's this obsessive compulsion to really be able to communicate through skill and craft. And so, you know, that's not something that comes very easily. It's taken me 40 years of just really committing myself on a daily basis, right? And so it hasn't been until very recently that I feel, for one of the first times ever, that I am now able to use it to my advantage. I can now manipulate my materials any way that I want. I can say anything that I want. But, you know, I also remember that I felt that way for the first time at 25 and then at 35, and so I'm sure it'll just kind of keep
going.
evolving and
You
I'll
keep going.
Yeah, sure, and I think that's the whole point.
But did you study here? Did you actually take art classes? I know you went to the Rhode Island School, and I'd love to hear about that experience. But were you in school, in public school here, making art?
I was in public school, but I didn't have access to art education until high school. And so, again, meeting Alex and just participating in these murals. Every summer that I had free time available, you know, I was painting on my own. I'd go after school and I'd meet Alex somewhere. You know, and I got to say, like, it was extremely important to have a very supportive family. You know, I had parents that, you know, I'm still convinced that my family still in some way doesn't quite understand what it is that I do exactly, because I think in terms of the norm of most of society, like, we still tend to have this exoticizing of, or there's a mystery about what the artist does,
Sure,
right?
they
And
probably
so,
wanted you to have a real job,
a real job, right? And so
Right.
I was going to go to a real school, right?
Yeah.
And so, but, you know, luckily I inherited the stubbornness of my mother. And so I really fought. I was really committed to just seeing this thing through. And so I think that working with Alex, by age 16 or 15, I started venturing out on my own for the first time and designing my own mural projects. And, I always, one of the stories that I cherish the most and I always tease Alex about is that by age 16 or 17, I had been commissioned by Tabasco McElhenney to compose this mural, and I was able to hire him as my assistant, right?
So you gave him a real job,
sure.
too.
But if this was, I realized that I am living proof of art education, of the arts in education. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of supporting young artists, right? It's extremely essential. But I also think that the experience of working on things like public murals really reshaped my perception, my perspective of seeing the world through a social lens.
Through what?
Through a social lens.
Do you hear him well, by the way, or?
Oh, I'm sorry.
You don't?
Very sorry.
Can you hear me? Or it's muffled?
How's that, better?
Yeah.
All right.
It's
I will talk in like this.
It's where we're putting, thank you. It's where we're putting the mic. He was a little muffled to me, too.
Sorry.
So for social...
Working on murals in the public for all those years really helped to reshape my perception and my perspective of America and of the way that I saw the world through a social lens. It really challenged me to see the world different. And once I learned to see, I really couldn't learn to unsee after that.
Yeah, I don't really understand that. How does that happen? And what were you aware of really going? Because you could have sat in a studio or with a bucket of paint or whatever you had and shut out the world completely. Well, you chose not to do that.
Sure, because I think that the beauty of working, the significance of working on something like a mural where it has public accessibility, yes. Right? And I was working with Alex in the housing projects of San Antonio. So I saw a totally different world, right? I mean, I grew up in the south side of the city that was, somewhat a fairly middle class, like lower middle class. But it was like stepping into another world, right? And it was less than a mile away. Mm-hmm. And it really helped me to see how I could provide a visual that provided a voice for others, right? I was able to tell stories. I was able to communicate and relate to people because they recognized their own story in a picture. And so it really sparked something within me that I felt like I really never turned back after that.
Let's look at some of the work.
Sure.
Let's look at Strangest Fruit.
Sure.
And tell us about, and by the way, when we're done here, you need to go out into the gallery and see it because it's so the reproductions are wonderful. But as is true always, to see it in real life is it's a completely different experience. And it's an extraordinary piece. One of a series of 9, did you do? A series of 9. Tell about the genesis of this, and then we'll look at this. Sure. Look at this image. So I created The Strangest Fruit in 2013. It was a series of 9 monumental oil paintings that consisted of one series. The series debuted in that same year at Brown University. And so in this series, I'm addressing a forgotten history, something that's been completely whitewashed, distorted, erased even. It's a part of American history, it's a part of Texas history, it's a part of Mexican-American history. This tells the story of the lynchings of Mexicans and Mexican-Americans in the American Southwest from the mid-1800s all the way up until the early 1900s. Like I think one of the last cases was documented as being as late as 1929, 1930 in South Texas. This series gave voice to the story. It helped to resurface this lost
again, this unknown history. You know, I'm most alarmed, Susan, by the social amnesia that I witness all around me. You know, these works become my way of countering social amnesia.
How did you find out about these lynchings? How did you come to the subject?
I first heard about the subject very vaguely, I think probably around 2001, right after I had gotten out of RISD. There was a small snippet of something that I mean, the internet was pretty young at that point, and I think I had come across something one day, and I just sort of locked it away, almost like a mental, you know, the computer file. And then it didn't resurface for me until about, you know, 12 years later. But I started researching, even in 2013, there wasn't a lot of documentation on this subject. Within the past 3 years, there's been a total of, I think, 3 publications, major publications that have come out nationally.
Well, what were the circumstances of the lynchings? Why
Sure.
were they? Who committed them?
So there's a number of different facets of why this occurred and of how it occurred. You know, I think that for me, the already dark and sinister history of lynching, of the subject of lynching in America, goes even further than most of us think. I mean, we know about the pain inflicted upon African Americans in this country yesterday and today, but rarely do we ever hear about, in this case, the lynchings of Mexicans and Mexican Americans. And so when we think about this subject in regards to the Latino, we have to consider things like the border and its politics. We have to consider hysteria in terms of immigration. It was occurring historically, not only today. Right? We have to think about language barriers. We have to think about things that pertain to the Southwest, the American Southwest, particularly in Texas, the land grab, right? The land grab in Texas. This state, this territory, this region was, a huge portion of it was already being ranched and farmed and in the hands, owned by Mexicans and Mexican Americans. We have to consider politics like broken treaties, right? And so this really fascinated me because, you know, growing up in San Antonio, Texas, one of the first things that we learn about in the history books in the public schools is the Alamo, right? And in all honesty, we learn one side of it, right? And so, I mean, I remember very early on, one of the first paintings that I ever encountered it really struck me because of its scale was I don't know if it's still there, but I walked into the Alamo on a school field trip and it was this large scale canvas and it was the siege of the Alamo. And I couldn't understand why I was identifying more with the dead Mexican soldiers than I was with the glorified Davy Crockett, right? And so this itch has always been embedded deeply within me. And so as I started researching this subject, then I started coming across a little bit of documentation that exists. So there's one photograph that features the Texas Rangers dragging the bodies of post-lynched Mexicans after they were cut down from the trees. And so a lot of this subject has to do with state-sanctioned violence in the state of Texas, in California, Arizona, and so forth. In this case, I chose to feature or to depict this subject through a contemporary lens. Right? It was important to me, it's always been important to me to connect the present to the past because this reveals self-reflection, right? I think that in the United States of America, we have a real talent for forgetting yesterday, right? And so I'm always reminded of the wise words of Gore Vidal, who once said, "We are the United States of amnesia." We learn nothing because we remember nothing, and how true that rings. And so again, this became my way of resurfacing this lost history. This became my ability to give voice to not only those who perished yesterday, but to I lost my train of thought, I'm sorry.
People who are being violated today.
Today, exactly.
For very similar
Right?
reasons.
Exactly. So I'm thinking about, although the noose is no longer present, it's invisible. But, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
But when I think about the threat, the symbolic metaphor of the threat of the noose, right? If you all just imagine a rope, right? And imagine the harsh, brutal symbology behind the idea of a rope and lynching. Well, I think about how this idea hasn't necessarily disappeared entirely, right? I can't help but think about oppressive agents in this country that, in this case, are designed to target and profile in this case, young brown Americans. And so it's important to address issues like mass incarceration in this country, a biased criminal system, immigration hysteria, stop and frisk programs, racial profiling, biased media, the military-industrial complex, and so forth, right?
It's such a huge burden for art to carry that's amazingly ambitious. Good Lord, you got a whole U.S. Congress and a government that can't handle that, and you're there with a paintbrush. That's pretty daring and pretty brave. Yeah. I'm
Sure.
going to interrupt you now.
Sure.
What was your thinking about not including the noose? Why wouldn't you paint the noose?
I think for several reasons as a painter, it's always important to challenge myself in the studio to create some sort of mystique, right? To create a story, and when I think about, like, even when I pick up a short story and read it, what drives me about reading certain authors is really the buildup, right? The sort of structured narrative. And so in this case, it would have been almost too easy to depict the obvious, right?
And it would have been so specific.
Sure.
You want us to look at this and think what's going on
Sure.
here, and why did he leave out the noose?
Sure, absolutely. Because I think that in the age of short attention spans, right? I think that the biggest challenge for most artists has always been, how do you keep a viewer for more than 2 seconds, right? And so I have various methods of luring the viewer in and of keeping them there. And that's just one of the techniques to get someone's attention.
So deliberately leaving it out,
Sure.
so that we will fill it in.
Sure.
And it pulls our own recognition
Sure.
to what's happening.
Yes.
And why do you put them against a white background?
Because they've come from a background that's been completely erased. They are almost non-existent in this space. Denying them presence of a landscape, of history, of narrative, is the same way that I sort of counter myself as a painter, right? As an image maker. I am also striving to represent them in the public, right? And so there is a duality, there is a clash, and there should be. I think that one of the biggest challenges for me personally of when I sit and evaluate, like, what is it to be an American, I think of, like, also the great quote by Henry James, who once said, "It is a complex fate being an American," right? And there is such a duality in this country of, it's a very fine line that certain Americans walk between being absolutely entirely invisible and being ever present, right? And so I feel like the vibrating energy of these bodies that dangle and hover gives them a sense of existing somewhere between the seen and the unseen, the living and the dead.
And who are these two? You paint in this series people you know.
Yes, yes.
Who are these men?
So everybody in this series was somebody connected to me, whether it was personally as friends or family. In this case, it's two brothers, Rico and Reuben Luna. Reuben is one of the head installers here at the McNay Museum.
Which one is he?
And he is the one
On the right?
facing away from us, right?
Uh-huh.
And I've known both of them for about 18 years now. Their participation in these projects is entirely as important as the subject itself, right? Their participation means that they are now they are active participants in rewriting and helping to rewrite their own histories. And so that's something that's extremely important to me.
Making it visible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And they're dressed in everyday clothes?
Everyday
Got
clothes.
Sneakers and, yeah.
So you'll notice that everything from hairstyles to tennis shoes to tattoos and the style of fashion, right, becomes extremely important because these become the markers. These become the stereotypes. These become the way that one is profiled even, right? And so in this case, he was the first of the series. This is number 1. And this was my, at that time I was restoring this old fire station here, and he was my tile guy. And so when I came up with the idea, I mean, I had been toying with the idea for the number of years that I mentioned, but when I was ready, when I was trying to figure out what am I going to show at Brown, it happens that easily. I mean, I was sitting in the studio and he was tiling my bathroom floor, and I walked up to him and I said, "Hey man, I have this idea. It's really hard to explain, but let me try."
I want to hang you.
And
How can you turn dancing off or you can't refuse?
And so I had the book Without Sanctuary that had just come out at that time, and it was this really amazing, beautiful publication that was brutally honest, and it featured this lost art almost of the lynching postcard, right? That was once as popular in America as baseball cards were.
Really?
And what was different about this book was that it showed on the left-hand side the lynching, and then on the opposite side showed the backs of the cards that were sometimes more or as brutal as the image itself.
Notes that
right?
people wrote on the back? You mean?
Oh,
bought the
people would send them
postcards
home
and
to their
sent-
mothers, to the grandparents, to children, to wives, right? And so they were like trading cards. They were collectibles. And so I used this as a resource. I used whatever I could scrape up off the internet and in a few other publications. And I was so amazed at how every single individual that I asked to be an active participant, not one of them hesitated, because my assistant and I, Mark Olivares at that time in the studio, did exactly that. Like, we got some rope and we created a noose and we placed it around their necks and photographed them, and while Mark would try to lift up. And it really was astounding how each one of them felt like they were participating in something important, right? And these are people that aren't affiliated at all with the art world,
Yeah.
right? But they were so committed to helping to see the project through.
So you took photographs.
I took
And
photographs.
then did you work from the photo, or did you ask them to come in and model for you over time?
No, I'm not that. I don't like torturing anybody that much and making them sit. So I work from both reference and then from, I always use the reference as just a mere guide, and then I'll invent lighting and tweak the palette and exaggerate the human form.
But you don't show these tormented faces. I've seen photographs of real, actual lynchings as well, and always the tongue hanging out and a neck is broken,
Sure.
and it's so distorted. Show us one where we can see a face.
Let's see.
There.
Okay.
Yeah, just stop with him a minute. and yet you don't show any of that.
Sure, but again, this becomes the duality, right? So this becomes the broken, collapsing, gasping physical body, right? But the spirituality in it becomes the enlightenment of realizing one's own truth, right? Becomes the facial expressions, becomes the hope in the eyes, right? And then that lends itself also in terms of the lighting, the light source in all of these images.
But these bodies are not tortured either. They click a few and
Sure.
let's just look. They don't look tortured. There's
Well, they-
something else.
They look defeated. You know, I think that they look defeated. They are in the midst of a struggle, but I also think that there's somewhat like these hidden gems of subliminal details. So for me, the shoelaces tell the narrative that perhaps the body isn't, right? The shoelaces have completely collapsed and are dangling and have given up, become lifeless, right?
But he hasn't.
Right. I mean, he still has. There's still a struggle, and that the depiction of the struggle is essential, right? And so, in this case, we see reminiscent of the handcuffs, right? But look at the markers, right? The details, the baggy jeans,
Yeah.
the tattoos, the shaved head, right?
Right.
These become the stereotypes of you know, I was talking with a friend of mine yesterday, and we had this conversation about stereotypes and how stereotypes themselves can cross over, not only even within the communities of Mexican Americans and Latinos, but, you know, in American communities at large, and in the police community, right? And so these become, they are the targets, right? They
Targets?
become, sure, especially I think he's the epitome of becoming that symbol of a profile, right? He fits the description of a gangbanger, of a homie, of a troublemaker, right? Of a criminal, up to no good, you know. And so I think that the tattoo, the tattoos become an extension
praying
of these
hands.
narratives, right? It becomes the what the collapsing hands, the binded hands aren't doing. The tattoo becomes the marker for still continuing the struggle, right? For hope.
Click a few more.
Sure.
Let's just look at this. Yeah. That's, there's something so spiritual about
Sure.
this. There's no defeat
Sure.
here. They are transcending
Sure.
this hideous thing that's being done to them.
One would think easily, because if I approach this, you know, as not as the painter, but as an observer, you know, I'd see exactly that. Absolutely. I mean, he becomes like he's almost rising to the occasion. He's rising
his
up.
soul and his body, everything is rising.
Right. But then when you start to put the clues and the hints together, and then you understand the context of what the series and the narrative is that's unfolding as a whole, then there becomes the conflict, right? There becomes the, well, so it's actually not some sort of rejoicing. It's not some sort of like religious iconography where he's ascending to the heavens. This is a dying body, right? A tortured body who is bound at the wrist and is being suspended in midair, right? So it's important that dilemma starts to occur within itself.
Let's show us a few more.
Sure.
Oh my.
Detail shot. You know, the lighting becomes extremely important, and for me, you know, that's just something that's always been, not only in this series, but in all the series that I've executed over a career and lifetime. The light is, you know, I think it comes from a number of things. It comes from my influence of the old masters, right? Caravaggio, Titian, Peter Paul,
Definitely.
Rubens, but the cinema for me was everything, because what American isn't influenced by the screen, right? Whether it's the television or the phone screen now, but the movies. That was such a epic moment for me as a kid, like just understanding the power of images and how an image can captivate an entire audience. That's what I wanted to do. And so that light, the theatrics and the drama that unfolded on the screen was everything.
What were the movies you loved as a kid?
Well, one of my favorite stories is at age 7 or 8, I'm not sure how my father convinced my mother to allow him to bring us all to the theater to watch Platoon, Oliver Stone's Platoon. It changed my whole life because, but I didn't realize what it was. I didn't understand until my mother looked down the row at all the kids and she said, "Now, if you need to cover your eyes, do it." And so when she said that, I was like, "Oh God, like what's gonna happen?" And I'll never forget it. In one of the epic moments of one of the unfolding battle scenes, I was paying more attention to the audience than I was to the screen because you could have dropped a needle in there. And I was so fascinated by how you could really just take someone's eyes and keep their attention focused. And I could watch facial expressions, and I was trying to understand like how emotions can be really manipulated by an image, right? And so I just knew like that's what I want to do, and I wanted to do it on a large scale, right? And so even not like The Strangest Fruit, but like many other series, I tend to gravitate towards that widescreen panoramic scope, right?
So she never took you to little kiddie movies, Disney, something nice? Never happened?
Yeah.
Super.
You know, it's
those are big bang bang movies. Super. I don't go to those movies, by the way. I don't, but my kid does.
You know, and for whatever reason, I was just, these were, the movies that really caught my attention were the ones that were about an American tale, right? These American experiences, historic and contemporary and extremely complicated. And I just was so fascinated by them. So I would get sheets of tracing paper, plaster them on the TV screen. I would trace I mean, it was a VCR this big back then, and I would press pause, and then I would trace stuff, and then those were my first lessons in drawing and learning the human figure and the human face and narrative, how to structure narratives.
And who is this? Tell us about this.
So this portrait is of my younger brother, and each one of these figures again is somebody that came into the studio. And so again, the outfit completely changes, right? Here's possibly a young athlete, right? And so it gives you a little bit of, I'm very much interested in these details of like the brands, right? The Nike and the logos on the apparel, because it also speaks to the language of American consumerism and what America is and who. Even in terms of advertising, I'm so fascinated by, again, the power of images, right? And psychology and how they play a major role and impact in our daily lives. And so in this case, we see this young American male who also hovers from almost a three-quarter view, right? Profile view. So the other thing that I tried to sequence in the narrative is that from number 1 through number 9, the body does a complete turn. So almost as if it's a ballet, right? Just sort of the body is dangling.
And you hang them that way?
Sure. So I would photograph each one from different perspectives, and this lends.
Oh, this is the full one of the detail you just.
Yes,
showed.
exactly. So this would lend itself more to the specific. Probably Texas history, right? Like the ranching and the lands here. I mean, and this was a friend of mine who really does dress like that and showed up to the opening with one boot and one bare foot. But I think it's important to call attention to the feet, right? Because the feet start to tell, again, the missing narrative, right? And so the narrative that's not obvious maybe throughout the rest of the image, but look at those feet. Right, and the viewer starts to ask themselves, well, what's up with the bare foot? What happened to that other boot? And so if you close your eyes and you think about how does one fling off a boot, right? It becomes an act of violence, right? It becomes, but without having to show, Right, the actual act.
But it's the residue of it.
Exactly.
Uh-huh. Let's do the city, that
Sure.
series. Oh, wait a minute, go back.
Oh, sure.
Sorry. Look at that. Look at that.
So for me, this was the final piece in the series, even though, because I created the large number 9 after the single figures, and at that time, before number 9 existed, this was the end of the series at that moment, right? And so it was my own reconciling of the narrative, of this subject, of this history, right? It was my only way of releasing the burden from these individuals. I cut him down, and he is on the verge of collapsing.
So this is the
Right.
very last one in the
This is the
series?
very last one, yeah. Now, when I did number 9,
That was
I wanted to really,
one of the 2 men.
yeah, I really wanted to expand that composition, because I wanted them to have an even more monumental presence. There was no more denying the acknowledging of this subject and of these individuals, right? And so then eventually this became the last of the entire story of my project, right? And so
This is the last one you show
right.
then?
This was the last one I created, and then I closed the book, right? And so,
Okay.
sure.
Well, then show us the
Sure.
cutting down one again.
Oh, sorry.
Oof. Oh, my goodness, seen like that.
Yeah,
As if
yeah,
it's
yeah. A sequence.
no, what are those books that you get and you,
Yeah, sure.
yeah.
The
You know
where you
what I
flip
mean?
them and
We
animate
can't
it,
talk about it
right?
without,
And that's the way that
that's what it looked like.
yeah,
when you
this becomes
quickly-
the moving image again. Animation,
Yeah.
cinema, right? This is how I see things in the studio.
But I must say, this is the first that I almost can't look at, because everything, all your themes come together in this. The violence, the transcendence, but the deep damage that's been done. It really all coalesces in this one. Oh, it's extraordinary. And the light, look what you're doing with that. Oh, okay, here you are working in color.
Right.
Now you choose not to for the next series
Right.
you do.
Absolutely.
So show us some of that and why. What did you do with all your colored paints?
Sure. So I ran out of funding, so I couldn't.
But you could have done blue. Your predecessors have done that when they couldn't afford it.
So, fast forward from 2013, 2 years later, I was.
What
Did
happened?
this turn on?
No.
I
There you
had
go.
just promised myself that my days of creating large-scale projects was done, and I, because of time
You know what,
constriction.
take it off and just hold it in your
Yeah,
hand,
I might.
unless that becomes difficult to. Sorry.
Might be a little bit better. Better?
Is that better?
It was in the city. I created the city from 2015 through 16. It took me 11 and a half months painting every single day to complete this 2 panels. This is the first panel. And the second panel was almost 40 feet. This first panel was I think it's about 8 feet by 5 feet high.
What was in your mind?
So the city becomes my fictional rendering of 21st century America. It is a self-reflection, right? It becomes my way of addressing the world and confronting the world outside of my studio that I feel like I see everywhere on a daily basis. Now, keep in mind that in 2015, it was relatively quiet compared to now. And what was most important to me was to depict something that I felt was so obvious. It was out in the open. It was as plain as one could see, but yet it was my way of saying, Americans we still have one thing that we have yet to reconcile, one thing that we have yet to confront, and that's one thing that's very simple, and it's the truth, the truth. And so here's the introduction to the city. When I was thinking about the title, the city, this can be anywhere in America. This can be, here we see a desolate landscape that's become a dumping ground. We see this almost majestic golden promised land down below. So it starts to make me think of these divisions, right? These barriers, these outsiders, groups, communities, us versus them. I decided to depict this pile. It almost becomes a pyramid, right? Like almost like a hierarchy. Sure.
Discarded mattresses.
Discarded junk. But they're very personal objects, like the television. The mattresses almost become like carcass-like.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking of two things that humans discard, things that ordinary people just decide one day we don't want this anymore. But on the flip side, I couldn't help but thinking about something like these tectonic plates that were shifting, and this pile is resurfacing once again. When I think about the issues of intolerance and hate in the United States of America, I think as much about how long it's existed in this country, and I think about how it's deeply embedded in the fibers of our nation. As much as I think about it yesterday as much as I do about it existing today. And so here's the main panel. Here we confront a gathering of Ku Klux Klan members, a dozen or so. And again, keep in mind the scale. And I want you to think about yourself. We've all had that experience once or twice in our lives, being the uninvited guest into a party. And so you walk into this room and the record scratches and everybody stops and looks at you, and this is what I wanted you to feel. We should feel disturbed by this image. We should feel uncertain about this situation and what we're walking into. This became in the studio for almost a year, a staring contest, right, between me and them. I was as curious about them as they were about me, and I feared them as much as they probably feared me.
I would imagine that.
Sure.
How difficult it must have been for you to go back to this every day and make it become more and more and more.
Sure. And I think that this is the challenge for me as the painter in the studio. I mean, I work extremely hard to create these experiences. I want the viewer to come with me into this experience. I want you to be able to walk around in the scene. I want you to feel. I want to disrupt your emotions, and I want you to feel what I feel when I face these subjects. Go ahead.
No, that's all right. Go on.
And so
they hang horizontally, side by side.
So here's the epitome of like that cinema scope influence, the panoramic widescreen.
And there's a baby with a hood.
Sure. So I think in this case it was, again, like Strangest Fruit and like many other projects, it's too easy to depict.
Excuse me, let me interrupt. If you can get your fingers off the mic itself and hold underneath by the thread, because they really make a lot of noise, don't they?
Is that better? Sorry.
No, further down. Even.
Further down. Good.
No, your actual hand on the mic. Hold it down on the wire. Okay, let's see how that goes.
I'll hold it here. I'll hold it here.
Okay, good. Yeah, just try to keep your fingers away from, because
I'll stay still.
Bang.
It was important to feature something as terrifying as a Ku Klux Klan member as an everyday, ordinary, common human being. this was my way of stripping them down of their power.
Well, you got the power over them.
Sure. And, you know, I think in this case, showing them as a family unit, as a community, embracing one another in debate, conversation, cradling the arms of a babe in these silk gloves. One of these individuals is checking his cell phone. You know, they have gathered on this fictional hillside overlooking this city. This was my way of asking myself, and really asking, you know, I'm not convinced that these entities, that these ideologies have ever been on the peripheries of society. I think that when we today still talk about subjects like this, it's very easy for us to say, well, that's those places over there. And
Now we're losing you.
this thing keeps turning off. Oh,
Yeah, that's better.
you know, it's very, I think in this case, it's very easy.
I'm so sorry.
It's
but
all right. It's very easy to separate the two. Maybe I'll just talk about how's that?
No, oh, here comes salvation. Handheld,
Thank
yeah?
you. Thank you very much. All right. So it was extremely essential to showcase him as Americans, right? Because it's my way of challenging the notion that that subjects like this don't really need any kind of relevance or platform, and then everything exploded, right? A year later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, we want questions too
Sure.
from the audience. So is there somebody going with a microphone? Or can you just stand up and... hi.
Hello.
Anybody?
Yeah, we do have the ability,
We're glad to take...
we have some microphones. If you'll raise your hand or move
Yeah,
to
let us know
the aisle,
if you have something...
we have microphones that we'll bring you so that everyone can hear your question.
Yeah. But we need to see you to be sure we know that you
Yep.
want to ask something.
Here we go.
Meanwhile, I do. Oh, have we got somebody here? Do you mind
Yep.
standing? Because,
She's here, Susan.
whoa. Wait a minute, get that away from your,
That was-
the
that
other
was me.
microphone. Okay. Oh, that's you?
Given,
Where
no,
are-
I
okay.
don't.
Okay, please go ahead.
Given that this is 2018,
Take it away from you. Yeah.
what image would you like for us to remember for this year?
Can you repeat your question?
Yes,
Yeah.
what image do you
Given
want
that
us
this is
in 2018 to remember,
Oh.
to take away?
2018, an election year, what image would you like us to take home with us to think about?
I can show you.
You're sure?
Here.
But what? That's no ordinary American flag.
It's not. I mean, I think that, you know, as the observer looking at this image, I can find variations in its meaning, right? And so it's titled 2018 spelled out in text. Here we see almost an eclipse occurring. You know, and this is one of those rare images for me where I don't have to think too much about it. I don't have to research it so much. And it happens immediately within 48 hours from start to finish. It feels complete, it's right, and I move on.
But why have you given up the color in all of these?
Sure. I like the idea of,
Oh dear, this is really terrible. I wish I could do something. Should we try putting the mics away? Can you just hear me shouting? You can.
I assume you're
that's good. Turn that off, and now see how that works.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah.
Bingo. There are reasons she manages the radio station.
I really like the idea of blurring the past from the present, and I think that we associate black and white images as being something antique, right? Vintage, historic. And so that's yet another method to draw the viewer in and to help give them that moment where they realize that's not 1950, that's not 1890, that's 2018.
Why don't you show some of those eagles?
Sure.
The ones that these are extraordinary.
So this is currently what's in the studio right now, and it's still in progress. And so you get a sneak peek at what's going to Mass MoCA next spring. This is a piece that first made its debut, well, this is based off of a piece that made its first debut here at the McNay. The drawing that premiered here in 2012 was titled Requiem. And so this sculpture has now been in creation since 2012. It's taken me this long to fully realize it.
How is this your first sculpture? You've been doing sculptural?
No, absolutely, no, I'm a...
What he does the first time.
So I worked I worked for 3 years with a master sculptor, somebody who knows, their craft. This guy is an amazing old school master and one of a kind. And I worked very carefully with him, side by side, to create this thing. And so here we see a 6-foot, 400-pound collapsing American eagle that is designed to hover slightly above the ground surface. And I think that, it becomes testament to not only the past, but to the present. And eventually, the next phase will be that it's cast in bronze, and that it'll start to travel around the country.
But to have that kind of facility for the very first time is quite something.
Well, I think for me, I see this way anyway. Every single one of these portraits is three-dimensional in my own head. They're moving, they are breathing, right? They're animated. I've always wanted to realize them and see it in full 3-dimension, and this is finally it.
And do you find this has limitations? You thought it would be a kind of freedom, but does it confine you in any way?
Let's just say I'm going to stick with painting. Because there's only one breed that has it worse than painters, and that is sculptors.
Yeah.
Yeah, to facilitate the manpower behind it, the actual labor, but the funds that are required, but the materials, right? And in a knowledge, it's a really challenging material. And so I'm going to pursue a few more pieces on my own, but they're going to be this big, right? And so,
Don't give it up, though, because your skill is so
Yeah.
wonderful. But I would imagine it would be much more limiting to you. You have to take so many other things into consideration.
Well, right now it's only probably the biggest limitation is that I don't understand the material fully on my own, like I do paint
Like you
or
do
pencil or pastel, and so it's going to take years for me to really gain the confidence and the knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other questions, anybody? Yes, over here.
Hi, I wanted to ask about your emphasis on social justice because I know there are a lot of young people here, and my daughter has gone off to college, and one of the first things she said to me that was surprising, and actually I was there when it occurred, was that the people who are becoming her mentors now at the college were actually quite dismissive of her emphasis on social justice in her artwork.
Sure.
And it made her think, well, maybe I need to give that up and, leave that behind. What would you say to all the young people here who may have that chispa, and who want to pursue these themes that are important to us as Mexican Americans, as Latinos, as people of color?
Sure. I think first and most important, be prepared, Because one of the things that I found about going to a major American institution like RISD was that many of the power structures out there, like institutions, are still not willing to have this conversation. And so to see institutions and examples and leaders like Rich and the staff at the McNay taking these necessary steps that are long past due to change this community first and then to change the larger community as a whole is epic, right? And it's extremely important, but I have always felt that the time was always now, even in 1987 and in 1996, right? The thing that I must say to all young artists is that in school, after school, 25 years into your career, 40 years into your career, you will always be challenged. Your work will always be challenged by others, regardless of who or where that is, right? Whenever you are taking the necessary steps to try and retell history correctly, there will always be an opposition to say, I'm not ready to hear this, I don't want to listen, right? And so all the power to the young artists who are going to be the next generation to make sure that stories like these continue to be told, right? You know, I really feel strongly that I am, in my lifetime, I am seeing for the first time, like the ground shifting. And it's only shifting an inch, but it's shifting. And there is this is a very pivotal moment where, you know, a window is opening, but as easily as it's being opened, it can be shut again. And so you have to continue to tell your stories. That's everything. And I think people are hungry for it. And I do have hope in the young people. We're all seeing this. And again, some of us might not be ready for this, might not be ready to listen, but the time is here. And I feel really strongly about that. You know.
The thing that strikes me so much in this work, in all the work really, is you are not doctrinaire. You have a very clear message. You have themes that you want to get out. But we hear them, they resonate with us because you have raised them to such a high form in your art. And I think that might be a piece of what you tell the young people, that it can't just be fists. You know, it can't just be anger. You have to embrace those of us who need to learn this through the power of the beauty of your art and what you can create. You really do that at a level that is quite extraordinary.
You're right, but at the same time, that in itself is a craft that has to be learned, right?
Yes.
And so we all start off like that, and then
Yes.
you go off to learn from other people and to learn from a new environment, and you learn to reshape that craft and to pull different influences and experience that you've never had before, right? And it's a lifetime of just refining and refining it, and that never ends, but that's the most exciting part. I mean, that's the part that is the most rewarding.
Keeps you going back
Sure.
to it, too.
Sure.
There's somebody in your family, a young person, who had a question. But can you go over where there's a microphone? Maybe the microphone person can come to you. And this will be our next to last question.
Okay.
So I want to know how and when do you come up with these drawings and like, so like when and where and how? Yeah.
And you have 30 seconds.
Oh,
Toughest
you're
question all night.
Thank you for the question.
This is my nephew, Matthew.
Matthew.
Who, by the way, just won an art contest on Friday and won a brand new bicycle. You know, I think that one of the things that has always been most important to me, Matthew, is that when I think that there's I'm stuck and I don't have any ideas and maybe I don't know what's inspiring me at the moment, you just look outside your window, right? You just walk outside and you look around you and the ideas are everywhere, right? There's so many endless things that need to be said, right? And it's as simple as that. Inspiration is everywhere, from music to television to your parents, right? And your family, your community. But sometimes, like some of these subjects, what's right in front of us, we might completely miss and not see it. So if you just start to learn to give yourself those special moments of really looking, learning to see, then it changes your entire life. It changes your whole world forever. Yeah.
All right? You'll continue? Vincent, I can't thank you enough. This has been such a privilege
thank
to
you.
be able to be with
It's been
you.
a privilege, Susan. And thank you.
Bravo.
I do, before everybody leaves, I have one special something that you just got to give me 2 minutes. I have a very special friend who I've known for 18 years now. He's one of the most brilliant artists that I know in my life. And today is his birthday. And I'd love to have you join me in wishing my dear friend Ito Romo a happy birthday.
Great. Be patient.
Hold on 1 second, he says. He's
Put it in your
trapped.
pocket. Put it in your pocket.
A whole new series has been.
Wait, there's more. Wait.
Now, if my middle school band teacher knew I was reading off of sheet music, he'd kill me. I couldn't memorize it though.
He can do everything. Later he's going to cook dinner for us. Want me to hold it?
It's better than music stuff.